It's showtime. Good afternoon. My name is John Holloway. I'm the director of the DoD Office of Global Public Safety Comms Modernization Effort. So what does that mean? That means that I'm responsible for updating or upgrading 179 PSAPs within the United States and 40 PSAPs in 15 different countries that stretch from Diego Garcia to Djibouti, up into the Arabian Peninsula, over to Europe, South Korea, and Japan. And we'll get into our mission partners a little bit later on, but it's interesting. Next slide, please. So my guidance is DoD Directive 8422.01 Echo. Okay, Section 3 tells DISA what they're going to do, even though they may not want to do it. Also, there's other sections that tell the services what they're going to do. So basically, I have oversight in creating an enterprise architecture, not just for the implementation of Next Gen 911, but also for LMR. LMR now falls under public safety comms. Public safety broadband, which includes FirstNet, Verizon Frontline, and T-Mobile Connect to Heroes. And if you've gone that direction and a little bit over, you'll see the T-Mobile vehicle with the neat pink lights on it. We got some frontline folks in the back over here. They have Thor, which is gargantuan. And then we have a bunch of FirstNet vehicles going out there as well as too. So as the directive states, it establishes the Office of Public Safety Comms. DISA, Lieutenant General Skinner, has the authorities to approve the architecture. However, we have taken the architecture higher than that, and I'll get into that in a bit. If you look at the DoD CIO digital modernization strategy, in their goal 1 talks about C3, and public safety comms is strategic element number 5. So within DoD, public safety comms is a C3 critical component. And it also directs DISA to develop a PSI net. So what's a PSI net? It's our version of the EZI-net. Okay, and the EZI-net is what connects all the various PSAPs together. So as we're getting into the modernization of Next Gen 911, computer-aided dispatch, location information services. What that is that every DoD installation has to be mapped with GIS coordinates. Every building, including the outhouse on the 19th green, has to have a latitude, longitude, and elevation associated with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the main database up into a DoD cloud. However, every DoD installation is going to have its own version of that GIS information, just in case they lose connectivity to the cloud. They can exercise their GIS capabilities independently. I already mentioned land mobile radio. One thing we're just starting on and we're trying to figure it out is fire, intrusion alarms, video surveillance, other sensors that are TDM. Okay, all TDM stuff has to be removed and replaced with IP. And what we're finding is that the installations do not know what they have. This also goes for all the tenants on the installation. So let me take Fort Meade for an example. Fort Meade has 48 tenants. Okay, so there's the EPA, National Archives, Anne Arundel Community College. We have DHA with Kimbrough Army Hospital. All their TDM stuff has to come out, and it all has to go to IP. And what we're looking at doing is to network all of this with 5G where we can, where it makes sense. Sometimes we'll use 4G LTE, but hopefully we can use a lot of 5G, especially out on the firing ranges. We'll have to put up repeaters and so forth, but we'll get there. And then emergency mass warning notification, that belongs to the Army, but it has to be in concert. Their architecture has to be able to fit within our architecture. Next slide. So if you were here last year, you saw the pillar slide. This is the way we like to show how we're eating the elephant. So pillar 1, Next Gen 911, emergency comm centers, PSAPs, dispatchable locations, Next Gen core services. That gets into your CAD, your records management systems, PKI, so forth and so on. Then the ATOs, records management, the directive, and 8423 is the instruction. We are just about ready to put that into formal review. So hopefully that may be out by the end of this year. Into Pillar 2, we have land mobile radio, broadband wireless, HF, UHF comms here, and then new technology as it comes out, be it 5G, 6G, 10G, whatever. Then we have in Pillar 3, which I just mentioned, is the alarms, cameras, sensors, unmanned aerial systems that are handheld. A lot of your fire emergency have UAS capabilities where they'll hand launch it, and if it has a camera or it may have an IR device on it, they'll look for people out and know where it's laying. How do we network body cameras into all of this? And then again, new technology, and then mass notifications. And if anybody has any questions at any time, just raise your hand, and I'll stop and get to the question. I don't like waiting until the last, because then I've forgotten what I've talked about. I'm getting old. Next slide, please. So when I talk to people about what is it that makes Next Gen 911, okay? What is it? Well, it's all these pieces in this puzzle. If I lose one piece, I'm not Next Gen compliant. This is the best way I can figure out how to talk to it. Because like here, okay, just released from the FCC, location-based routing. That means that within 6 months, no, it's 3 months. 3 months, your major carriers have to route a 911 call, if it's made on base, to that installation's PSAP, okay? So again, I'm going to Fort Meade right now. With Fort Meade, if I take my cell phone and from the DISA headquarters and dial 911, it hits Anne Arundel County. And then Anne Arundel County will transfer it to Fort Meade. So in 3 months after this thing was published to the Federal Registry, all 3 carriers, T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, now have to route that call directly to the Fort Meade PSAP. telephony modernization. This is something that everybody forgets about. In the civilian sector, again, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, they're doing this. They're shifting all the TDM stuff to IP. Well, and the DoD, who owns the phone networks? DoD. So we have to take all our telephony and convert it to IP. And then when we do that, we have to put location information servers on that IP network so that then they can reach out and grab the latitude, longitude, and elevation of that 911 call if it's on a wireline. If it's on your cell phone and you have a demuck device, what do the OPSEC people tell you to do with your demuck device when it comes to GPS? They tell you to turn it off. Well, you turn it off. Now you don't have location of where you're at. And that there's two things that happen on that. One is if I make a 911 call, I won't know where you're at. But the vendors are fixing that because if it's turned off and you make a 911 call, it'll automatically turn your GPS on and then pull the latitude and longitude. But the other thing is if there's an alert in the area from IPAWS, which is the integrated public alert warning system that FEMA runs, and you don't have your GPS on, you will not get that alert. Reason being is that IPAWS uses a geographic polygon by law within that alert area. And by law, the signal cannot exceed 100 yards outside of that polygon. GIS mapping, I already talked about that. Public laws, we got Kerry's Law, Ray Baum's Act. PKI, okay. What's going on with PKI? Every PSAP within the nation, 6,000 of them, and federal PSAPs are going to be connected using PKI. Why is this? Public safety comms is considered an element of the national critical infrastructure. Okay? So that adds something to the security of it. A lot of public safety comms, because the states aren't looking at the cybersecurity end of it too much right now, are getting hammered. Malware, ransomware. At least once a week, somebody's getting hammered. Zero trust architecture. Okay, right now the FCC has a requirement out for zero trust. So if you have caller ID and it comes up spam on your caller ID, it's gone through zero trust, which is being provided by the carriers, your Verizons, your AT&Ts, your T-Mobiles. Information sharing. Okay, now we're getting into the NENA I3 standard. NENA being the National Emergency Number Association. They have developed what they call the I3 standards that has a lot of different data points in it. And it's also ANSI certified, the American National Standards Institute. DoD will not create a new standard. If there's one out there that answers the mail, we'll use it. And we'll put it in a DISPER, we'll put it in a DIPPER, and so forth. But all these, this is not Next Gen 911. We got policy, we got funding, we got mutual aid agreements, state municipal nets, ESI nets, cloud adoption, so forth and so on. LMR, mission partner gateways. So, any questions on my puzzle? What's wrong, Michael? Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the calling today. This is how calls are answered or made. So we have some of the DoD stuff over here. We have state EZNets in here. And then we have some of the DoD networks over here. And then we have the campus area networks in here. So what we want to do is basically get rid of this.
Good afternoon. The keynote will begin in a few minutes. Please make your
I got out, talk to them.
hall
Next slide, please.
to the right of the 600 aisle. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, we want to get rid of that. There we go. So here we have the commercial side, because within DoD, we have every type of PSAP you can think of, and maybe even more. We, like I mentioned earlier, we have 179 PSAPs on DoD installations. We have some DoD installations that use municipal PSAPs. And then we have two entities, two towns in Arizona that use the DoD PSAP and responding elements. So we have it all, which makes life very interesting. So the idea is, if you're inside, like I mentioned, okay, everything's going to stay down in here. If you're outside, maybe you're in base housing. Okay, that may go a different route because of where the base housing is. But this is where we want to get to. Now, this architecture has been approved by the DoD Enterprise Architecture Engineering Panel, which is a mouthful. What that means is that it's been approved up at the C3LB level, DoD CIO, Joint Staff J6, OUSD A&S, and a couple others. And the EAEP is more than a panel. It's about 187 engineers. Some are from the Army, some are from the Navy, some are from the Air Force, some are the Marines. So basically the Navy says they're fine with this, okay? Next slide, please. Oh, go back one. So for all of you card-carrying members of the DoD, better known as having a CAC, you can go to this website down here on the bottom, okay, and pull down these documents. The technical architecture document, the SRD, there's 4 of them. I forgot what they were. Anyways, there's 4 documents up here that you can pull down and use, okay? But remember, if you don't have a CAC, you're not going to get into it. This is a joint staff website. Next slide. So, every year, by the order of Congress, the ECPC, who knows what the ECPC is? Emergency Communications Preparedness Center. It's basically a virtual center, and it's comprised of 13 federal agencies. And it's operated by DHS CISA. So every year we have what is called the annual assessment report, and we're getting ready to do that in March. And so what they've done is that these are the number of calls that came out for calendar year 22. So there are 217 million. Okay. 157 of those were wireless, AKA smartphone. Then we have our old plastic hardline phone, VoIP calls, Text to 911. Text to 911 is coming up. Okay, so for the hearing disabled and so forth, and text to 911 is part of NextGen as well as video. So here, misrouted calls. It could take, the average time to route a misrouted call is 40 seconds. The FCC last year commissioned a study, and if we can shave 60 seconds, 1 minute off of a response time across the nation, 10,000 lives can be saved. 1 minute. And for you and I sitting here today, 1 minute, big deal. But if you happen to be a party of a heart attack, either the victim or somebody attending to the victim, 1 minute seems like an hour. But if we can do that, that'd be great. So the number of PSAPs, 4,600, 697, and they're collecting fees. Did you know that everybody in this room is paying a 911 recovery fee on their phone? It could be $1, it could be $1.25, and in some places it could be even $5. It depends upon where you live. The state can charge it, and then the county and or city that you live in can charge it. Okay? This goes to the O&M for the current 911 call center. It does not go to support the implementation of NextGen. There isn't enough money to do that. They figure it's going to cost $14 billion to implement NextGen across the United States. In DoD, we figure it's about $1.1 billion. And you can get this at this FCC website. Next slide, please. So thanks to Arlene from Navy, these are the 911 calls for 23. And I'm not going to go over it, but you could read it all. But the total's 528,000. That's just Navy. That doesn't include the Army, Air Force, Marines, or Coast Guard. So what's happening, and I'll get to this in a minute, is that GAO is now doing it. In fact, they've been on it now for about 6 months. Is doing a GAO audit for the implementation of NextGen 911 within the federal sector. So this gets into the 13 various agencies within the federal sector that have 911 responsibilities. Next slide.
What's the purpose of the audit from GAO? What are they going to do with all that?
They were told by Congress to do it. Congress, as you'll see in a later slide, if I get a congressional request from Congress about every 6 months, where is the DoD in the implementation of NextGen 911? What is DoD doing to implement NextGen 911? Right now I have a congressional I've responded to, which is being reviewed at the higher levels way beyond me, okay, of the activities that DISA, aka me, have done to implement NextGen for the last year. So we had to list everything we're doing. Working with the services, going here, going there, working with DINA, getting architecture approved and so forth. So we get these at least every 6 months. So the GAO audit for the federal sector is, okay, where does the Department of Interior stand? Okay, so in the Department of Interior, you have the National Park Service. National Park Service has 3 primary PSAPs and 20 secondary. NIH has 1 PSAP. And that's all I've been able to get out of the GAO folks. Because the other federal agencies like DoD about 3 years ago, they don't want to give up that information. Now, they may have given it to GAO, but GAO will not release that information until such time they release a report. So like the numbers on the previous slide, okay, that came from you, you copied me on it. Okay, I could not get the GAO to give me those numbers. That's why I used your email. Next slide. Okay, we're on it. We're on it. Okay, so roughly a month and a half ago, I got a call from U.S. Forces Japan, J-35. And they're trying to answer emergency medical care in Japan. Basically, there have been, and the Congress has gotten wind of there's been needless deaths in Japan because of lack of medical care. So this came out of Indo-PACOM, Chief of Staff from the Admiral to the 4-star at U.S. Forces Japan. And this is just some of what was said. And we're looking at how, next slide, let's see. So this gets into what we're looking at doing. This is what we're working with the Marines, because it's basically Okinawa. It's not on the main island, but it's basically Okinawa, okay? So it's getting into dispatch service capabilities, PSAPs, Next Gen 911. How can we improve them? Because the Japanese government looks at the association of a person's name and phone number as being confidential. Okay? So we look at it as being PII. I mean, we put them on the signature blocks on our emails, we hand out cards, and big deal. So we're trying to work through some of this, and we're working with State Department on the agreements as well as the sharing of information. So if we can get Japan to utilize the NINA I3 format, okay, for data sharing, it'll go a long ways in helping each of us reach our goals. So it's already starting with Japan. The European Union just last week released new requirements for PSAPs in the EU area. And we're going to start working on what are those requirements, because we have to take those requirements and insert them into requirements that we already have. Okay, so if the EU says you got to do something, well, you got to do something. So it's getting into SOFA agreements and so forth and so on. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, I want to focus a little bit on Japan. These are the PSAPs that we have in Japan. The Vesta R7s are going to be replaced with the Vesta R8. And what's going to happen is that the R8 is getting ready to go through JITC testing. Any hardware or software that we're going to use within the next gen realm has to go through JITC testing and be applied to the APL. If it's not there, it's not going to get bought. Or if something is already out there, they're going to have to come back and get tested, or they're going to get removed. Next slide. So we're looking at call handling systems, the standards. A lot of tech details to be for the interface and interoperability with the Japanese systems. Host nation, calling to comply with our policy or modify our policy, comply with their policy. And again, GIS information. Okay. Without the telephony modernization and the GIS information, we're SOL. Okay? That's that simple. We will not make next gen 911 qualifications. Next slide. So this is what we're looking at doing to be compliant. Establish MOUs, MOAs, so we have to go through state on that. Update our current handling systems. Location information systems. Modernize the telephony systems. Get rid of TDM. Get rid of analog. It's gone. It's history. It's junk. Next slide, please. Okay, so items of interest. I thought you'd like this one. On the congressional side. House Bill H.R. 6319 911 Saves Act of 2023 with a companion of Senate Bill 3556 Enhancing First Responder Response Enhancing First Response Act. What is all that? Basically what it's doing, if passed and signed into law, it's going to raise our 911 operators from a clerical position to that of an emergency responder. So now, you've seen, I don't know if they do it in this area or not, but I know around Fort Meade, 911 operators, $5,000 signing bonus. Everybody is short-handed on 911 operators. And we'll train operators, and then they see an ad, and we spend 6 months to train them, and now they've gone off in the civilian world. Okay, get more money. So by moving them up into the first responder category in the GS classification, they'll get better benefits, better money than being a clerical person. So that's what these two bills are trying to do. Secure Networks Act, okay. Today, like I mentioned, everything we do has to go through JITC, okay, which means it's also going to get inspected for backdoors, bad code written by bad parties, and on the hardware side, they're taking it down through the supply chain risk management to inspect the transistors, resistors, and the boards. So if there's one on there by a bad company, it's up to the vendor to remove it from his entire stock before we'll buy it. On the civilian side, the Secure Networks Act is forcing the civilian side to do the same thing. So they can't go to Walmart or Target and buy a server. But we all know that the civilian world doesn't like the feds to tell them what to do. And that's at the state level. And we also know that the municipalities don't like the states to tell them what to do. So what they're looking at doing is tying this to the grant funding that's available through the Federal 911 Coordinator. So if you put money to it, then they'll do it. I already talked about the implementation of the GAO audit. I'm currently working with the DoD CIO 5G cross-functional team, enhanced LMRs, et cetera, et cetera. Who knows about the World Cup? So in 2026, June and July, the U.S. is going to host the World Cup. And it's going to be in 11 different cities within the United States. 3 in Mexico, 2 in Canada. So what we have been asked to do by DHS is to look at backing them up. So in the cities like Dallas, and I forget where all the others are, but if their 911 system gets overloaded, what's the backup? DoD in those areas. And it's just not for 911, it's also for LMR, because they're going to be using LMR. So how does our LMR network interface with the federal, the state, and the municipal networks? And we're going to have a big meeting of this in April down in Dallas, where FIFA is going to have their headquarters. The thing with this, it's a pilot, because what's going to happen in 2028? Olympics, Summer Olympics. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's going to get interesting. Yeah, what Mike is saying over here is that 2026 is also the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution, the founding of the United States. So, yeah, we're looking at 10 million visitors, and the World Cup has 48 different teams, so you're going to talk about 48 dignitaries. Well, not 48. You're going to be talking dignitaries from 48 different nations coming. So the Secret Service is going to be extremely busy. Next slide. My slide changer is falling asleep. Location-based routing. Okay, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and it's going to make a difference on DoD installations, but the biggest difference it's going to make is with the Coast Guard. And the reason for that being is that right now, I don't know if you know this, but Coast Guard has authorities. If you draw a circle around the United States, well, the east, south, and west side of the United States, and you make it 3 miles off the coastline, okay, the Coast Guard that's where their authorities begin, okay? So now, and this has happened several times, is that, say a family goes out in a boat and they go 3 miles out, go fishing. Something happens, whatever it is. Now, they may have UHF radio on channel 16 or VHF on 16, but the kids don't know how to use it. They don't know you pick up the microphone, press the push-to-talk button, and say, help. They pick up their cell phones and dial 911. That call hits a tower. But now the tower doesn't know where in the hell it's coming from. So that call can bounce around within the system for 15, 20, 30 minutes before they finally realize, oh, I got to send this to a Coast Guard Rescue Center, Rescue Coordination Center, or a Coast Guard Command Sector, okay? So with location-based routing, when that call hits the tower, they know exactly where that call is coming from, and that tower will see that is 3 miles out, and then route it to the Coast Guard Rescue Coordination Center or Command Center, whichever is closest. That's the big thing on this. Next. So these are my DISA internal partners. So I got the DOS team here because they're looking at our friends at Microsoft. Telephony modernization. PSINet down in SD. Finance. PKI over in security. Mobility with First Apps. Okay, FirstNet. There are certain apps that FirstNet has that you can get off the DISA storefront. So once we get the PSINet built, DISA Global out at Scott will be monitoring it, okay? Because we have a reporting criteria from the FCC. If we're down something like 3 hours, it has to be reported to the FCC. Cybersecurity PKI, Fourth Estate, records management. And with the JOC, we issue DAMs, or DISA advisory messages. Next slide. This is a good one. Our external partners, okay? So we have, so up in here, I got a different slide, didn't use it, but up in here I have the National Security Council. Why? Public safety comms is part of the national critical infrastructure. We have the Association of Professional 911 Communicators. Congress, like I said, Congress is on my back. I have the House Armed Services Committee, the Commerce Committee, Commerce and Energy, Oversight Reform, and both the House and Senate 911 caucuses. They're always looking over our shoulder. We're also responsible for the implementation of 988 dialing, the National Suicide Hotline. And it's not just within the states, it's also at every DoD installation that is OCONUS. European Emergency Number Association, the European Union, the I forgot what they were now. Emergency Number Association and its subcommittees. The National Association of 911 Executives. Every state has an executive. We meet with them once a year to find out what the states are doing and where they are on the implementation of Next Gen 911, and we backfill them on what we're doing. DHS, we all know about CISA. S&T is looking at doing an interoperability testing, much like JITC does, but they're using some of our documents, and they're going through Texas A&M. Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards Technology. Under them is the Public Safety Communications R&D Department. Then we have FirstNet Authority, countries, as I mentioned, a couple ASDs, 12 other federal agencies through the ECPC, Department of State, and so forth. I think that's the last slide. Mr. Slide Changer. There we go. Any questions? And that's, say again? But we don't have PSAPs there. Okay? We have to have a PSAP. Same way in Australia. Okay, we have the Marine Deployable of Darwin, but they're using the Australians. So in the Philippines, they'll be using the Philippine services. Now, if we grow in the Philippines and they do put emergency comms in, then yes. Okay? Any other questions? Laura?
Hey guys, yeah, I have a question specifically for Fort Meade and the other military installations. Some of their housing is actually off post. It's right across the street from the post. Would that fall under Anne Arundel County public, or would it would route to Fort Meade?
So when we get back to the location-based routing, okay, Fort Meade has to get with the county and say, okay, here's my line. So it will go up into housing, across, come down, and they'll have geographic data points at all the where they do the 90-degree stuff. So that way, when it yeah. So right now, you're talking Fort Meade. So right now, in Fort Meade, okay, the Fort Meade Emergency Services covers part of Route 175, part of Route 32, and the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. Out here, if I go up to Vandenberg covers part of I-5. If I go up to JBLM, Joint Base Lewis McChord, they have out Route 5 up there, and they have first responding capabilities or response up there as well. So you remember about 10 years ago when they had the Amtrak derailment? That fell into Joint Base Lewis McChord's first response area. And then they have it until the civilians can get there and take over. Any other questions? No, he has to turn it up over there.
Test. Okay. Susan Ronning with AdCom Engineering. So we work a lot with municipalities, and so a lot of those local municipalities are in the process of upgrading their 911 centers and doing next gen 911. How is this working? Are you working together with the state and locals for doing that?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
That's part of. Go back one slide. So that gets down into here with NASNA and DINA. Okay, the National Emergency Number Association. They've created the I3 standard, and then we work with NASNA. Okay, and there's a consulting, kind of like a consulting firm called Mission Critical Partners that work with them and with the states. So like in Maryland, for Aberdeen, okay, the Army has a program called BEX, Base Emergency Communication System. So what they're doing is they're getting us together with the county, because the county doesn't know who to talk to on a state or on an installation side, and the installation side doesn't know who to talk to in the county.
Right.
So once we get that relationship established, then they do a lot of talking between each other on what's happening.
Okay, that's exactly what I was looking for, because a lot of the agencies we work with, they have agencies they don't work directly with the feds, even though they're right there, and so that's just that communications.
You know, we got to work together.
Yep.
Because we also have to change the MOAs and so forth as we move to next gen.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I told you I can heckle from anywhere.
That's a bottle of Knob Creek, I tell you.
So there was a Navy officer that had a heart attack in the front lobby of the Pentagon, and the phone call routed to Texas instead of a local emergency dialing. So part of that is the infrastructure at the Pentagon is special. Are we taking that into consideration as we move through going to NG911, because they do, JSP does have some intricacies that most people don't.
So that was a misrouted call, which you saw were umpteen thousand misrouted calls. Okay, so if I make a call in the Pentagon, it should route straight to force protection. Okay. Force protection will then call the medical center and then the medical center will send their golf cart wherever they got to go. At the same time, Force Protection will call Arlington County, and Arlington County will dispatch an ambulance and a fire truck. Then they bring whomever it is down on the golf cart, and off they go. Same way with the Marks Center. Marks Center does not have golf carts, but they open up the gate, and Arlington County goes right on in, and with escort, they go to wherever they got to go. So that was one of the misrouted calls. Any other questions? Well, I thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the show, and make sure you take home a bunch of geedunk.